Hello, my name is Carlos Andrade. I'm a digital forensic investigator in the Canadian cybersecurity team. I offer the following expert testimony about the investigation procedures that took place during the Five Eyes Summit in relation with certain cyber attacks. My team was part of the Canadian delegation and it was tasked with the security of the computer systems that the delegation used during the summit. In coordination with the host of the summit and the other members of the Five Eyes, we set up to deploy a secure network. But first, it was necessary to understand the legal and regulatory framework that an international summit creates. We conducted research into the different laws, regulations, and standards that every member of the Five Eyes has created. Armed with this knowledge, we were able to establish the security baseline for the infrastructure, as well as procedures for the business continuity and response to incidents. During the course of the summit, we were called to investigate a denial of service attack, for which we follow our incident response plan and the service level agreement. All the intelligence that we gathered during this procedure was shared with our allies to enhance our combined security. We also suffered an internal attack. A ransomware virus was inserted into our network, disrupting our operations temporarily. It was necessary to activate our business continuity plan and launch a full investigation into the attack. After the damage was contained and the systems recovered, we documented all the investigation and shared the intelligence with our allies. Official investigations are still ongoing. It's in this context that now I offer my answers to the questions of this panel. Each nation has its own policies, strategies, standards, and legal frameworks regarding cybersecurity. This regulation determines the scope and means that can be used during an investigation. Understanding these commonalities and differences of these policies in every nation is important to be able to correctly behave at every step of the investigation. Since the search and collection of evidence in cyberspace often crosses borders, especially on the internet, and involves citizens from different nationalities, the applicable laws and standards are not always clear. Different levels of privacy protections, limits of search warrants, safe havens laws, etc. All of these affect how we can obtain the information that we need for the investigation. In Canada, for instance, the most important regulations that any investigator should follow are the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, the Bill C-59, that's an act respecting national security matters, the ITSG 33 Information Technology Guidance, and in addition to that, although it is a foreign law, the General Data Protection Regulation covers any European Union citizen on Canadian soil. Without a blanket international law that governs cyberspace, many complexities can emerge when it comes to the origin or jurisdiction of cyberspace. International lawmakers have been unable to come to an agreement on whether to view cyberspace as a global common or as a private property of a specific country. To access evidence hosted in cloud providers, which are usually private companies, it is necessary to follow the protocols and regulations of the nations where those companies are headquartered, or the laws of the nations that has any kind of sovereignty over the data. For instance, if the data is hosted in the United States, any criminal investigation will have to involve the USA laws. But if the data belongs to European private citizens, then the GDPR is also relevant. Some progress has been made in developing legal frameworks to combat cybercrimes. For example, in 2018, the United States enacted the Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data, or CLOUD Act, to speed access to electronic information held by US-based global providers that is critical to any investigation from one of the allies. Investigations of serious crimes ranging from terrorism and violent crime to sexual exploitation of children have benefited from this new legal framework. From the Canadian perspective, the investigation of any cybercrime has to be framed by our own laws of criminal investigation, the international criminal law, and the laws of the country that hosts the evidence we need to collect. This is going to restrict where, how, and how much data we can actually retrieve and use. For example, if the investigation involves data from EU citizens, we will be mindful of the GDPR restrictions. Luckily, there are some collaboration agreements between allied nations that can be leveraged to speed up and to extend the scope of the investigations more easily. Criminal investigation regulations like the chain of custody standards need to be applied to give certainty to every step of the process. During the course of the investigation of cybercrimes, it's easy to face ethical conflicts during the handling of the data and equipment that is involved. Often, the urgency of resolving a security incident, like a ransomware attack that is disrupting the operations, might motivate cutting corners or overlooking certain protocols. This not only risks the investigation itself, but it could also put citizens or nations' security at risk. Every forensic investigator should abide by the standards of investigative protocols and evidence handling. These standards help as a guide to resolve such conflicts. When working under the jurisdiction of the United States, the investigation was properly documented with search warrants and consent forms. The rules for the protection of the change of evidence was followed. The privacy of the citizens' data was considered to establish the access limits for forensic investigators. During this investigation, we have to be mindful of the risks, like siphoning personal protected data along with the data we're really interested in. We also should be mindful of not exposing information that could compromise the security of the country or its citizens.